my YouTube channel. If you're new here, my name is Kyra Beasley. I am a therapist in training, writer, speaker, and who knows, maybe in a couple of years I'll be a policy advocate. We'll see. But I discuss topics and I write at the intersections of psychotherapy, pop culture, personal development, sociopolitical theories and ideologies. So if you are interested in any of those things, you should subscribe to me and follow me for more meticulous, intrusive thoughts and epiphanies. So as you could tell by today's title, we'll be discussing a lot, specifically on Gucci Mane and schizophrenia, the parallel between Black boys in the hood and mental disorders. So this is something that we have to unpack, I feel. So on October 20th, 2025, Gucci Mane and Keisha Kayor aired on The Breakfast Club to discuss his new book, Episodes, The Diary of a Recovering Madman. The married couple openly talked about Gucci Mane's schizophrenia diagnosis, psychosis episodes, triggers, and his life experiences that may have led up to the mental health disorder. It is also worth noting that Keisha explained her experience being a caregiver to someone with schizophrenia and what progression looks like on their pathway towards healing. Gucci Mane's public history reveals a life shaped by violence, substance use, unstable attachment, financial precarity, profound loss, and the weight of systemic oppression. While this article is not a biographical analysis, these elements matter because they mirror the same structural forces that put Black boys and men at heightened risk for trauma related disorders, psychosis, and schizophrenia spectrum symptoms. Many of these conditions are not the result of individual failure per se, but of short sighted policies and political regimes that create environments where survival eclipses their well being. As someone who grew up close enough in the hood to witness the psychological cost of survival, yet sheltered enough to avoid its most severe consequences, I aim to draw parallels between these lived realities and the clinical frameworks that often overlook them. What does mental health look like for a person who grows up having to choose between paying light bills or water, securing childcare or taking a lower paying job because that's the closest thing and most reasonable, or facing hunger or the risk of jail time? These are not abstract questions. They are the daily moral injuries imposed on Black communities. Too often, Black individuals are denied the same grace, clinical recognition, and diagnostic legitimacy that other groups with similar symptoms receive. And this is where the nuance begins. In this video, I aim to cover a couple things. One being the social determinants of mental health within the African American community, a general synopsis of Black boys and men in underprivileged communities in developing mental disorders, the most common symptoms according to the DSM-5. I also want to go into the explanation of episodes, what that looks like, what triggers look like, PTSD, drug or medicated induced disorders, and so on and so forth. And I want to start off this video with a disclaimer. There is a notable lack of Black men who remain significantly underrepresented in clinical and epidemiological research because many studies report findings for Black adults as a combined group. Some data in this article reflect broader patterns across Black communities that are relevant to both Black men and women. But I highlighted Black men because of Gucci Mane and its prevalence in the Black community. Also, there was an article written by Schwartz in Blackenship in 2014, and they reported that African Americans are both disproportionately diagnosed with schizophrenia at 4 times the rate of white Americans and often misdiagnosed, typically due to racist undertones, harmful stereotypes, lack of cultural competence, and or the close resemblance that psychotic disorders present when compared to one another. So let's hop into the social determinants of mental health. To understand why schizophrenia spectrum symptoms appear at higher rates among Black boys and men, we must first examine the environmental conditions that shape their earliest experiences and often prime the nervous system for psychological vulnerability long before a diagnosis is ever made. Growing up as a Black boy in the hood means inheriting a landscape of adverse childhood experiences, economic scarcity, and systemic abandonment, conditions that magnify the very symptoms we later diagnose as mental health disorders. So high adverse childhood experience scores, unstable housing, community violence, and limited access to care shape the earliest formative years of mental health for Black boys, creating patterns of trauma and survival that are frequently misdiagnosed, overlooked, or pathologized. African Americans African Americans are more vulnerable to developing psychotic risk factors than any other ethnic group. And this can be found by the APA, American Psychiatric Association. At the same time, a lack of resources and care disproportionately affects African Americans. Therefore, psychotic risk factors must be inextricably linked to systemic abandonment and presenting mental disorders. For instance, homelessness. Unstable housing leads to an increase in deteriorating mental health conditions such as anxiety, depression disorder, and psychosis. Generally, these conditions are accompanied by substance use disorders and suicidal ideations. According to the National Alliance to End Homelessness in 2020, more than one third, or 40% of African Americans faced homelessness despite representing only 14% of the overall population. Once they experience homelessness, Black adolescents are 69% more likely to re enter homelessness compared to their white counterparts. BMC Public Health in 2024 stated this as well. So, this is greatly due to historical institutionalized racism, such as redlining, housing policies, discriminatory lending, and devaluation of assets in predominantly Black neighborhoods. Um, and we can talk about economic instability as well. So, the lack of financial resources is partially responsible for mood disorders, anxiety, chronic stress, substance use disorders, and a heightened risk of Alzheimer's. This could also be found at the American Psychiatric Association online. And approximately 95% of individuals diagnosed with mental health disorders report that they lack the funds to meet their basic needs, much less can afford healthcare costs and treatment. The Center for Economic Policy and Research in 2021 confirmed what many of us already knew, which was that Black youth had been jobless at nearly double the rate of white youth since 2007. Black men in their prime working years have carried the highest unemployment burden of any racial or gender group from 2000 to 2020. Their imprisonment, 6 times more frequent than that of white men, making the picture even bleaker. Because most incarcerated people work for little to no pay, or little or no pay, they're not counted in employment data, meaning entire segments of Black men disappear from the nation's labor statistics. When it comes to food and nutrition insecurity, there's a lack of food security can lead to mood dysregulation, resulting in both physical and psychological harm. Studies demonstrate that children and adolescents suffer the most from food insecurity, directly impacting their ability to utilize cognitive functioning, decision making, and emotional regulation. This vulnerability is plainly correlated to behavioral health issues. Children who experience food insecurity are at a higher risk of taking on additional mental health care costs as they transition into adulthood. The Annie E. Casey Foundation revealed that 2 out of 5 Black children experience food insecurity, which is double their white peers. It is important to note that schools often misinterpret behavioral challenges as ADHD, ADD, or defiance, etc. And the thing is, this misdiagnosis pattern begins in childhood and extends into adulthood, where environmental trauma continues to be labeled as pathology rather than recognizing this as a systemic injury. While getting a diagnosis is important, assessing a child's environment should take precedence. Otherwise, clinicians and educators risk pathologizing children for simply reacting to an environment that does not holistically support their well being. Studies show that relational wounds such as family trauma, attachment injuries, discrimination, prejudice, social exclusions, etc., contribute to higher levels of chronic stress and mental illnesses. Persons who have lived through adverse childhood experiences, including intimate partner violence or food security, are more at risk of developing major depressive disorder and or schizophrenia spectrum disorders, all of which disproportionately affects marginalized groups. Communities that are placed within environments plagued with toxic air pollution and heavy lead show a correlation with high levels of depression and psychiatric disorders. Children who live in areas with poor air quality, high noise levels, and little to no green landscape have a 55% chance of developing a mental disorder. With that said, Villarose in 2020 reported that African Americans are 75% more likely to live in neighborhoods near power plants and hazardous facilities. We saw this firsthand with the water contamination in Flint, Michigan, the oil spill that rained down on a predominantly black community in Roseland, Louisiana, and the railroad site near the Fifth Ward area of Houston that contaminated the oil and air, leading to open investigations and claims of in cases of cancer. Once these systemic pressures accumulate across childhood and adolescence, they can manifest into adulthood as a range of psychotic symptoms that are often misunderstood, misdiagnosed, or stripped from their environmental context. Williams et al. Said that while genetic factors may increase the risk of experiencing psychosis, it is environmental stressors such as traumatic life events, autoimmune insults, or substance use that often act as the trigger and barriers to care, such as lack of knowledge about the symptoms, lack of possibilities for treatment, i.e., no local specialist, and the lack of access, also no insurance, which can exacerbate the condition. So it is important to acknowledge that not all symptoms of psychosis are the same as those of schizophrenia. Other disorders present similar symptoms, such as bipolar and major depressive. The National Library of Medicine in 2023 suggested that 2.6 million Americans um, 18 years of age or older display symptoms of schizophrenia, and 40% of whom go untreated, largely due to mass incarceration, early passing, or unstable housing. Below is a list of some psychotic symptoms from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual from the 5th edition. This could look like reoccurring relationship problems of work or school performance, experience with hearing voices and being uncertain if they are really present. This could also look like seeing visions or images that aren't present, overt paranoia and suspicion, inappropriate behavior like wearing summer clothes in the winter, impulsive actions, swift mood swings, disorganized thoughts and speech, catatonic behavior or maintaining a rigid, inappropriate, or bizarre posture, to a complete lack of verbal and motor responses, anhedonia or the ability to experience pleasure and joy, the lack of motivation or self initiation, little to no emotional expression, and many, many, many more. Those were just the few. While some psychotic experiences emerge independently of substance exposure, others are triggered or intensified. Um, others are triggered or intensified by drugs and medications, particularly when a person already carries unresolved trauma or genetic vulnerabilities. Drug-induced schizophrenia is described as a chronic psychotic disorder that resembles drug-induced psychosis but persists long after substance use has stopped. The condition typically emerges when a person already has underlying vulnerabilities like genetic risk or previous mental health challenges, and then uses substances that trigger or worsen the psychotic symptoms. Research shows that cannabis hallucination I'm sorry. I cannot talk today. Hallucinogens and amphetamines carry the strongest association with transitioning from temporary substance induced psychosis to a long term schizophrenia spectrum condition. Other substances, including inhalants, sedatives, stimulants, and even certain prescriptions or over the counter medications, may also contribute to symptom onset. But substances are not the only precipitating factor. For many Black boys and men, trauma, especially early chronic or repeated trauma, can destabilize the nervous system so deeply that psychotic symptoms surface in moments of extreme stress or emotional overwhelm. Post traumatic stress disorder induced psychosis is typically caused by one's experience being intensely stressful to the point of losing touch with reality. Developmental trauma, along with chronic exposure to abuse, neglect, and extreme stress during childhood, is strongly linked to complex PTSD and increases in individuals' vulnerability to psychosis later on in life. Early trauma leaves lasting psychological and neurological imprints that make individuals more reactive to stress and more susceptible to trauma related triggers in adulthood. When new stressors arise or when reminders of past harm resurfaces, these unresolved wounds can manifest as hallucinations, delusions, or other psychotic symptoms. PTSD also frequently co occurs with other mental health conditions, including bipolar disorder, panic disorder, and borderline personality disorder, which can further elevate the risk of psychosis as well. So, together, these overlapping conditions create a heightened state of psychological instability, significantly complicating individuals' ability to navigate their PTSD and manage co occurring symptoms effectively. And for those who enter the criminal justice system, a system that disproportionately targets Black men, the psychological impact can be even more severe, with carceral environments amplifying existing symptoms or generating new ones. Harsh environments and inhumane treatment while in jail or prison can offset a myriad of psychotic symptoms. The Center for Addiction and Mental Health suggests that the prison system sees mental illnesses rates roughly 4 to 7 times higher than in the general community. Integrally, the overlap between offending and severe mental illness is shaped by shared developmental risk factors such as broken families, poverty, substance use in the home, and early trauma, which increases both criminal justice involvement and later mental illness risks. People with serious mental health problems are more likely to face unemployment, live in impoverished neighborhoods, struggle with daily life management, and engage in behaviors that bring them into conflict with the law. Simultaneously, untreated symptoms can directly trigger some offenses, indicating a direct correlation between mental illness and criminal behavior. To address this overrepresentation, CAMH recommends moving away from fear based responses and instead adopting treatment oriented, inclusive approaches where Black mental health care, early intervention, and social support replace pure punitive measures. Preventing the incarceration of individuals with mental illness requires stable housing, income support, accessible addiction services, and targeted efforts in communities with high needs. When individuals with mental illnesses enter the criminal justice system, priorities should include timely screening for mental health problems, appropriate care during incarceration, and coordinated reintegration plans that address housing. Not only housing, but employment, community mental health linkage, substance use treatment, and family support. The path towards recovery for Black boys and Black men affected by trauma, untreated psychosis, or environmentally induced mental health symptoms cannot rely on the medical system alone. Even though that sounds great in theory, in reality, this is not the case. Especially when the system that historically ignored, misdiagnosed, or pathologized them has done this numerous of times. Mutual aid networks, community based care, and caregiver support systems often serve as the first line of defense. These informal structures provide what formal institutions frequently fail to offer: consistent emotional presence, culturally competent understanding, and sustained support through crisis and recovery. For caregivers, which are often mothers, grandmothers, partners, siblings, or close friends, the burden is heavy. They are asked to interpret symptoms without training, de-escalate crises without resources, and navigate medical, legal, and or social systems that were never designed with Black families in mind. Caregivers frequently experience their own forms of secondary trauma, chronic stress, and burnout while trying to keep their loved ones safe. Their work is invisible labor, yet it is foundational to the survival of Black men living with trauma related or psychotic symptoms. And you can honestly see it when Keisha K. Ward talks about it on the radio show, The Breakfast Club. Even though she says, she loves Gucci Mane dearly and she would, give everything for him, I would not be surprised if she experienced her own secondary trauma and burnout with having to be his caregiver. Mutual aid fills the gaps that traditional institutions neglect. Community members may pool funds for medication costs, facilitate transportation to appointments, offer temporary housing during episodes, share food during periods of instability, or even provide emotional grounding during psychotic breaks. These networks function as culturally specific safety nets built on reciprocity, not charity, on solidarity, not saviorism. For many Black families, mutual aid is more than support, it's primarily about survival. Recovery for individuals living with schizophrenia and other disorders is most sustainable when caregivers are supported too. This includes access to psychoeducation about symptoms, crisis response planning, respite care, support groups, and trauma informed training that empowers family members instead of blaming them. It also requires addressing the structural barriers that worsen mental health outcomes, such as unstable housing, poverty, discrimination, and the lack of early intervention. When caregivers receive adequate support, the entire recovery ecosystem becomes stronger. Ultimately, healing in Black communities must be communal, political, and culturally grounded. While mutual aid does not replace structural change, it does offer immediate relief while pursuing long term systemic reform. As we reimagine what mental health recovery looks like for Black boys and Black men, we must invest in the individuals who support them. Caregivers deserve resources, recognition, and rest, and communities deserve systems that affirm that recovery is possible for both individuals and the collective. I hope you got a lot out of this video. This was a ton to unpack. I had to do a lot of research surrounding this topic, but I'm deeply passionate about these types of topics because one, I'm passionate about mental health, and so I'm in school for it. That's what I aim to make a career out of. But I'm also a girl who watched the men and women in her family struggle with systemic oppression, thus struggling with their own mental health and battles with addiction and so on and so forth. So I'm wondering, what do you guys think about Gucci Mane and schizophrenia? Did you pick up his book? Have you read his book? I haven't read his book. What are you thinking about, his life story and how that may have contributed to his schizophrenia diagnosis? Do you know loved ones who are dealing with schizophrenia or anything that's on the spectrum? Are you a caregiver of someone who has a mental health disorder? I want to know your thoughts. Make sure you comment below, follow me, subscribe, share the video to someone who you care about or to someone who maybe may be able to relate to the video. And I'll talk to you soon. Bye.